Thank you all for coming out today. Before I begin, I'd like to thank all our sponsors, and I want to give a very special thank you to my organizing committee, Mariam, Adil, Sanya, and Diana. As we organized this year's symposium, I kept asking myself what it was that we wanted from this symposium. Why were we here organizing this when sometimes it felt like the Muslim community was always having the same conversation over and over again, trying to find answers for the question of identity. But in the process of bringing this symposium together, I found my answer. The Muslim Protagonist is not simply a conference on identity. It is that, but it is also so much more. The uniqueness of Protag is that it is not just a religious conference, a literary conference, or a conference on identity. Rather, it is a platform that brings all three together into conversation with each other so we can have a nuanced discussion on the ways in which the arts can be used as a means of empowerment. This year's theme, Rewriting Home, Shifting Sites of Belonging, and the breakdown of the panels in the past, present, and future speak to all the questions that we have to consider both as a literary artistic community, but also as a Muslim community. And while I say Muslim community, we know the boundaries of that term cannot be delineated. I think James Baldwin put it best when he said, "The bottom line is this: you write in order to change the world, knowing perfectly well that you can't, but also knowing that literature is indispensable to the world. The world changes according to the way people see it. And if you alter, even by a millimeter, the way people look at the world, at reality, then you can change it. If there is no moral question, there is no reason to write. I'm an old-fashioned writer, and despite the odds, I want to change the world." This is the spirit of the Muslim Protagonist, and it is the reason I stand here today addressing all of you. It is the reason this symposium is just as relevant today as it was when it started. What brings us here is the power of art. We write, we produce, create, and we interrogate our own understandings of art because we are here to change the social fabric, to rewrite history, to construct new narratives that include our voices, and to resist the histories that erase us. Art is a way of representing reality. And so to create a new understanding of the world requires us to utilize it as a tool. The arts have usually only been accessible to those in power, who have used it to erase us from history. But our people have also always found ways to make use of art subversively. And that is what we are here to do, to utilize art as a means of social change. We are here to challenge the status quo and create new narratives. But that can't be done until we first name the things we wish to challenge. Naming something gives it power, but it also gives us the exact tools we need to deconstruct it. And the power of art is that it allows us to name the things that cannot be articulated otherwise. That is the cathartic nature of writing that I personally have experienced. It has allowed me to name trauma and grief, and in doing so, find healing. I want to share a few excerpts from a short memoir piece I wrote, which ties into the theme of this year's symposium. Each paragraph is taken from different experiences with my grandfather. He was the first to immigrate from my family, and last year he was in the hospital on life support. The title is Immigrants Live On. They say the story of the girl in a third world country, the story of the girl's education, is really the story of the family. What they forget, but is just as true, is that the story of the first generation child is the story of the immigrant family. And my story is the story of my grandfather, my Baji. As I saw him lying there day after day, I thought of the life he had lived. Where did my grandfather feel like he belonged, I wonder? When immigrants have no chance of going back home or have no plan to go back home except to visit, do they always feel like they are living in a land that isn't theirs? Are they always in a place of homelessness? Us first-generation kids feel like we are too American to fit in our parents' land, but too ethnic to fit into America. But how can this only be the story of our generation when immigrants leave their country, their very place of belonging, uproot themselves to move to a country that doesn't even want them there? Our stories are all linked, but we forget this. My Baji wakes, and my uncle and I both rush to his side. He looks at my uncle since his head is already tilted to the left side. My uncle says salam and asks him how he's doing. We talk the way we would talk to children. My baji blinks to reflect that he's doing well. Little did we know then. I want to ask if he remembers me, but I do not because it will only make him frustrated if he cannot. So many people in my family ask him that when he is conscious for the little bit that he is. All we want is to know that he remembers us in his last moments. But what does it really matter? What kind of consolation are we looking for? What is memory but ghost-like images we carry? We already know that his memory has been deteriorating. Even before he came to the hospital, he couldn't recognize some of us. But we continue because it is the only solace we have. I wonder what happens to the people in hospitals who don't have their children to translate for them. They would have diagnosed my grandpa completely differently if we hadn't been there to tell him what to do in Punjabi. Is the medical system failing immigrants? Failing for those whom English isn't a first language. My Baji understands basic English, but perhaps in the condition he is in, he has only Gujarati left in him. I wonder if souls know language. When we lose memory, what do we become? Are we still the same person when our lived experiences have disappeared? Do we retain language even when we cannot retain anything else? Do we keep the memories that mean the most to us, or the ones most repeated? I don't know. But I do know that my grandpa said very little, even when he was conscious, yet when we were all together in that room, as many as could fit in the small room, making a collective dua prayer for him, we could see him mouthing Ameen. So these questions of, and the excerpt is over, so these questions of memory and nostalgia and who we create art for is not simply a question for this generation, but it is one that needs to be answered for all generations. But while we uplift our narratives, we remember that we are also here to challenge them and to challenge ourselves. Not everyone will be able to relate to everything spoken about here. Why? Because there is no singular Muslim identity. Instead, we have brought together multiple Muslim identities to speak their own stories. Challenging ourselves also comes in recognizing the burden of representation we place on Muslims within the arts. Since our voices are already so marginalized, when we see a Muslim in the arts, in media, in various industries, we expect them to speak to all Muslim experiences. We ask ourselves why they aren't speaking about such, and we criticize them for not being relatable. However, they can only speak their story, and to ask them to speak ours is to place on their shoulders a burden nobody can be expected to fulfill. As a South Asian Muslim, I have a kind of visibility that others don't, but I also carry a burden of representation. As an Indian Muslim, I live at the intersection of being a minority within a minority. And as an Indian Muslim, I also exist in a collective imaginary that doesn't even have a space for me. But somehow I am expected to perform Pakistaniness, since that is the only place South Asian Muslims exist within the hegemonic narrative. And I can't because that isn't what I grew up with. And our conversations are too limited right now. We do not uplift the various narratives of our community, but instead focus on the few narratives that we can, because at least those voices are being heard. But in doing so, we silence the plurality within our ummah. And that is the point of the conversations we have here at Muslim Protagonists, to recognize that there isn't one kind of Muslim. But it's also important to ask, what does it mean for us to be here today? For me to stand here and talk about home, talk about all the myriad connotations of that word, speak to nostalgia and the past without being an immigrant, discuss building and creating sites of belonging. We are privileged to be having conversations about home and belonging when there are countless others, both within this country and internationally, who are forced to confront these questions in material terms every day. Some of us, especially those of us who are people of color, believe it is different when we have these conversations because our people are the ones suffering. While that is true, we also have the privilege of leaving our communities and some of those material conditions behind. So we cannot forget that we are still privileged in standing where we stand. I'd like to end on a hopeful note about home. Later on in the day, there will be a photo project for you to peruse. Sania Khalid, one of our committee members, asked individuals what home meant to them. While she was doing so, I wondered what home meant to me, and I couldn't think of anything. Only one quote kept coming to mind. Home is where all attempts to escape cease. And yet this still didn't quite capture the essence of home. Such a simple word and yet so difficult to define. As I continued trying to grasp the meaning of the word, I remembered a line from the spoken word piece I performed yesterday, where I said, I am torn by India, the land that will always call me Paraya. And that gave me my answer. I would say that home is a place where you do not feel strange. I have yet to find that place because we are other in America, and for the people of diaspora, we know that we are also other and strangers in the lands of our heritage. So although I have yet to find that place, it is the alternative future I imagine for ourselves, a place where our communities can exist and belong. And on that note, welcome to the 4th Annual Muslim Protagonist. I hope this symposium is just as rewarding for you as it was for me when I first attended.